With the valve body installed in the transmission and the rear end ready to go, it's time to reinstall everything, and that's coming up right now on this episode of FoxBody Rehab.
So we mentioned earlier that POR15 is now a Hemmings Garage sponsor, and that's working out really well for us because we actually like using this stuff. So we're going to take the opportunity to show you how the main product works. It's the POR15 rust-preventative paint. We're going to work on these backing plates for our drum brakes. The backing plates are probably the only part of the original rear end that we're keeping. We've got all new brake parts to go on them, and of course we've got the new Moser rear end. But these were really rusty crusty. I think you saw how they looked when we took them off. We had Glenn take them up to his place and run them through his bead blast cabinet. So the rust and crust has been stripped off, but now we want to make sure they stay this way. We could hit them with spray paint and that might be okay, but we're going to use the rust preventative paint. It's a lot tougher and it should keep them looking good for a long time. So this is a 3-step process. The first is to degrease, the second is to metal prep, and then the third is to apply the rust preventative paint. Each of these steps is important. You don't want to just put the rust preventative paint on because the finish won't adhere correctly. But if you do all 3 steps, it's pretty simple and the stuff really holds up well. We've used it a lot, so let's get into that. So we've cleaned them up with degreaser. Next step is the metal prep. We've got some in a spray bottle. We're just going to douse them again, and then they have to sit for about 15 minutes. All right, we're getting ready to apply the POR15 rust preventative paint, and you're going to want to use the gloves for this. The kit includes a pair. We're going to use our nice little can here. Should be more than enough for what we're doing. I think the directions are to put it on heavy enough that it coats very well, but not so heavy that it will run. All right, now I've got the first coat done using the bristle brush. We've got to let this dry, but not fully. POR15 says you should do 2 coats of this stuff, but you should wait for the first one to dry till it's just tacky to the touch, then get the second coat on.
So we've installed our valve body, and now I'm going to install the torque converter. The factory torque converter has a stall of roughly 1800 RPMs. For a harder launch, we want a higher stall converter. So we have a new one from LenTech that's going to be, I believe, about 2800, so that's going to give us a good launch right off the line. I'm going to add a quart of fluid into our torque converter because you don't want to install it dry. So we're going to pour this in. This will help lubricate everything. So as you can see, we have 3 shafts with splines, so we have to make sure that we're engaged on all of them. And these 2 slots on the side are what engage your oil pump, which is behind this cover. So you have to kind of jiggle and rotate and shake and make sure you get it in where it needs to go. There's one. There we go. And now I'm just going to measure and make sure we had the same recessed depth that we had before. We had 3/4 of an inch before, and we have exactly 3/4 of an inch now. And most of your Ford torque converters have a drain plug in it, which you need to line up with one of your reliefs here on the flex plate. So I've already set this one pretty much straight up and down. Transmission made it up. Brian here is installing our transmission mount. Since I had to hit it with a hot wrench, we needed a new one. And now it's basically just going to be hooking up lines, shifter, tighten up our torque converter, put our starter and our cover back on, and then we'll be moving on to our drive shaft and rear end.
So you have to be sore every day to do this. Every day you're going to be sore and you're going to come away with something. You'll be like, oh, that's a new bruise. Oh, that's a new cut. Oh, that's a new this.
Yep, every day. Every day.
How'd you get that scar, FoxBody?
Yeah. All right.
This is where the brake line that goes to the rear ties into the one that goes to the master cylinder. So we're going to replace the line that goes all the way to the rear because it's been repaired a couple times and it's crusty. So I'm going to disconnect it here so we can start getting it off the car.
Terry's undoing the union up top. I'm going to undo all the brackets down here that hold the rear brake line in. And when we lift it up, we'll be able to peel it all out of here and get rid of that compression union in the back and this rust that we have going on here. The line is riveted in, or the brackets for the line. I am going to have to drill out the rivets and replace them afterwards.
Before we get the new axle up into the car, we want to replace the brake lines. We're really concerned about the main one that goes from the engine bay back to the rear end, primarily because it had this compression fitting in it. You're not supposed to use these in brake lines, and the rest of it's kind of crusty. The good news is we have a kit of all new pre-bent brake lines from Classic Industries. So they're made to fit the car. We just have to match them up and fish them into place. We've already got the new one in there, and Junior's getting it bolted up right now. We're going to be putting a new rear end into the car from Moser Engineering. Now, it's still an 8.8 style like the original, but this is one of Moser's M88 MusclePak rears. It's a brand new casting filled with brand new stuff. It also came with a set of Moser's control arms. These are fully adjustable. They're going to replace these originals. You can see the Fox Mustang bushings were really huge at the front here, and then standard rubber in the back. These are just stamped steel. There's a lot of flex in those front bushings. These have urethane bushings in the back for a little more stiffness, and they're Heim jointed in the front for zero give. Plus they're adjustable here, but they still have a mount for the sway bar, so we can keep the factory sway bar. The uppers are also adjustable. They're also Heim jointed in the front, and they come with urethane bushings back for where the ears are on the axle housing. So we're gonna get these set up. We're gonna adjust them to match the length between points on each of the factory arms, and then once it's in the car with the rear axle, we'll check the pinion angle and reset from there.
Right here is our brand new Moser M88 MusclePak rear end. This one is equipped with 373 gears and a Detroit True Track. And over here, we have our press, which we're going to use to press our brand new sealed bearings onto our 33 spline axles.
And this is what's going to take all the force. The bearing goes on fairly easy. The retailing collar normally takes a lot of pressure, because this is actually what's eliminating your C-clip. And this is what keeps the axle in your axle housing.
Okay, so our new control arms for both lower and upper use spherical rod ends at the front end. The spherical bearing up there allows this arm to move around, so it still has the same range of motion, actually has more range of motion than it did before, yet there's no play in it. It's going to make it stiffer, it's going to make it better for drag launches, and take any of the movement of the rear end out.
So now that all the Moser control arms are in, Terry and Junior are lifting the rear end up to be mounted. So as you can see, the rear shocks in there, well, they're original and they are also blown out. However, for the purposes of just hanging the rear end, we're going to mount them, but we do have new shocks on the way.
What people need to understand is that while bolting on new parts to improve a vehicle is great in theory, it's the fine-tuning of those parts that's key. What you can't see are the tweaks that Junior and the crew are making to make all those parts function correctly. That said, if you're going to undertake a project like this, make sure you set aside ample time for test fitting and adjustments, because it's those moments that will make all the difference when it comes time to getting the car back on the road. That said, once the rear end was put into place and the rear control arms were installed and adjusted, it was time to get our new aluminum drive shaft installed, which would bring us one step closer to achieving our goal.
All right, the axle's in. Now we're going to put the new drive shaft in. This is from Summit and it's aluminum. It's kind of cool because Ford Racing used to sell an aluminum drive shaft back in the day that was easy to buy, pretty reasonably priced. I don't think they have it anymore, but Summit has this one, so we got it. And it's a direct fit for the original. Should slide right into the trans and right up to the yoke. So we've got the axle in the car, but we've still got our old springs in there. These are the lowering springs that came with the car that we really didn't like. We ordered a new set, and they were supposed to raise the car up a little to give us a tire clearance for the sticky Mickeys, but the new springs actually sat the car lower than these. They were also softer than these, and even though these are stiffer than we liked out on the road, the stiffness will be good when we go to do some launches. We'll have to get it dialed in with the new shocks that are coming. Once we have the car out and we've tested it a little bit, we'll have a better idea of what springs and shocks we need. Okay, our POR 15 rust preventative paint finally cured. It takes a few hours. Depends on the weather, as we said. Then we hit it with some POR 15 top coat paint to seal it up because the rust preventative paint is UV sensitive. Not a huge deal with backing plates for the brakes, but just in case. So these are now ready to put on our new axles. Now, these slide on and should fit over these bearings. These 9-inch style bearings we're using with the new axles are going to be real tight to the backing plate, but they should fit. We took the O-rings off just to make sure we didn't damage them while we were sliding the backing plate over. You might have to file the holes a little bit to get them to fit, but it should fit without too much trouble. And there it is, and it's on, and then we can take our O-ring and very carefully put it back in the groove. And then we're ready to slide the axles into the housing.
With the backing plates redone and our new axles and driveshaft installed, Junior commenced on reassembling the Mustang's rear drum brakes. You see, the originals were really crusty, so instead of refinishing the old 32-year-old parts, we decided to source direct replacement drums and cylinders to make sure that everything operated like new again. Now that the new Moser rear end was installed, and the rear drum brakes were completely rebuilt, it was time to move to the front of the car and replace what looked to be the Mustang's original shocks with our Summit Racing 9010 drag shocks. You see, originally we had thought about replacing them with some adjustable units, but in the end we made the decision to try them and see how the car fared. Once the shocks were installed, we treated the Mustang to a new set of front discs and calipers, slapped some Moser stickers on the axles, and got ready for the next phase of the build.
Man, we got a lot done on this episode. From the front and rear suspension to the brakes, the crew here are absolute champions. But we're obviously not done, as you can see. We still have a lot of exterior and interior bits to do, along with some buttoning up on the mechanical side. And that's all coming up next time on FoxBody Rehab.